Hey everybody, welcome back to Equity Guru. Today I'm talking to Alf Stewart from Searchlight. SCLT is your ticker symbol, Searchlight Resources. Alf, we've been talking about your company for a little bit, and I guess our focus has been on Kulyk Lake, where you recently put out a starters resource. But we were talking off camera. It seems like you've got a little bit more of a thought that there might be another property that you've got that might need shorter term attention. Why don't you tell us about what that is?
Okay, Chris, thank you very much. So the property that we were discussing is called Duddridge Lake. It's a uranium and other critical metals prospect in Saskatchewan. It's about 80 kilometers to the northwest of La Ronge, and La Ronge is kind of the main staging area for all of the properties in northern Saskatchewan. And you can get to our property primarily by road, and then you follow a rough track, and you can access the property without helicopters. We may use a helicopter from time to time to get at the more remote parts of the property. But Duddridge has got an interesting history. It was discovered by a prospector for Noranda in the 1970s, and they drilled a bunch of holes and published a modest uranium resource of about 450,000 pounds of uranium at 0.1% U3O8. Now that's a historic resource, and under local policy 43101, we're not allowed to rely on the work of others in terms of what the resource is. However, we're discussing the historic resource of this property. It was picked up by Fission Energy, a very famous uranium company in Saskatchewan, and they worked on the property from 2007 until 2012. And they re-drilled and republished a resource estimate for Kulyk Lake, and basically has the same numbers that Noranda had, which is around 450,000 pounds of uranium at a grade of 0.1% U3O8. But they also did another interesting thing. Is basically the reason why this resource was discovered is there are boulders sticking out of the ground that are hot. You can put your scintillometer against them, and the boulders were mineralized with uranium, which was uraninite, but it was also mineralized with copper, vanadium, and cobalt. And those are all critical elements. Those are all valuable. These are things that we need for the green revolution that we're going through in energy and transportation. So this attracted me to this company. I actually joined them because I thought Duddridge Lake had a lot more potential. And also the historic work done by Fission Energy recommended drilling, and they didn't drill it. Why? Well, they made a bigger discovery at Patterson Lake South and turned into a $500 million company. So that work is left to be done. So we're working on Duddridge Lake right now. We're doing a mobile metal ion survey to test the areas that are covered by glacial till, looking for more uranium. But even as it stands right now, we know the existing mineralization is open at depth below 200 meters and along strike to the north and to the south. So we see potential to expand this interesting uranium property by drilling more uranium, but also assaying and considering the significant values of copper, vanadium, and cobalt.
So who first got their eyes on this property? Because it seems like when Fission is a discovery factory, like they've had discoveries up and down for the last decade. So it's no surprise if they got their attention swayed by something else. But who wrote the initial report on this one?
The report, the resource report was done in 2007 by Stuart Fraser, and subsequent technical reports were done by Ross McElroy, who's a very famous geologist who's got a number of uranium discoveries to his resume.
So you've basically come in here off the back of these guys having their attention put on another wall with a shiny light. Do you think that they meant to drop this one for you?
I don't think so. No. But you've got to consider how tough things were between, say, 2012 and 2020. We went through one of the biggest bear markets in uranium. So this is one of Searchlight's advantages. We have been collecting properties in Saskatchewan that have very significant potential, and we've been doing this for 5 years. And we have been building a significant portfolio of critical metals properties. And we've got a good management team. We actually have a connection to Fission Energy. You know, everyone gives Fission Energy credit for the discovery at Patterson Lake South. But actually, the original discovery was a joint venture between the sister company to Searchlight, called Alpha Minerals, and Fission Energy, 50/50.
True.
And Searchlight's former CEO was a guy named Dr. Ben Ainsworth, and he passed away in 2017. And so Searchlight was the sister to the company that had a 50% interest in Patterson Lake South. So we have a very good connection to it. And I've been following Fission Energy and their discoveries in the Athabasca Basin for many years. And actually, my background includes working in Saskatchewan as an exploration geologist. And I worked on one of the original discoveries in the Athabasca Basin called Midwest Lake. And so what I'd like to tell people about how you discover uranium is many uranium discoveries start with a boulder field. You find the uranium boulders at surface, and then you have to follow them up ice and below the boulders to find the discovery. That's the history at Midwest Lake that I was familiar with as a young geologist. That's the history at Patterson Lake South. And we think it's only partly been applied at Doddridge Lake. We have a big boulder field. It's 1 kilometer long. We put out in our press releases the numbers, and they're very good grades of uranium and copper, vanadium, and cobalt in boulders. But the drilling directly under the boulder field has only come up with modest grades of uranium. So we think basically what typically happens is the glaciers come down from the north, they plow across the country, and they tend to displace the boulders somewhat to the south. So clearly, we should be looking to the north of the boulder field. And that's part of what we're doing right now. And I'm excited about it because I think there's potential when you have high-grade boulders, but low-grade mineralization. Maybe there's more to this story.
Yeah, it makes sense. The boulders don't come up from the ground. They come down from the side of a mountain, right?
They come down from the side of the mountain, and sometimes they're pushed along by glaciers as the glaciers pushed across North America 20,000 years ago. They tend to push the boulders away from the bedrock. So the glaciers kind of act as a scraper, and they scrape the loose rock from the surface, and they tend to displace it. We don't think it's been displaced very much. We've read the previous work on this property fairly closely. We just think possibly there is better grades to the north. And in any event, we can see just based on drilling that they haven't closed this thing off in any direction.
Mm-hmm. So that's interesting. So that really sort of puts you, as much as you're a very low market cap explorer, it puts you at the very beginning of something that potentially, if the dice are showing you what we think they're showing you, could be something really quite impressive once you've done the work.
Yes, that's exactly it.
And if any of those elements in those boulders are primary, well, they're all in demand. It doesn't matter whether it's vanadium, copper, uranium, whatever else. That's a grab bag of stuff that we really need.
Yes.
Where does this leave Kulyk Lake?
Well, Kulyk Lake has tremendous potential. And what we're waiting for is the OPEC moment with rare earths. If you study the rare earths market, you'll realize that we in the West are tremendously vulnerable and entirely dependent on China for our rare earths. And many people are not familiar with that say, well, so what? Well, so what? No cell phones, no electric cars, no modern jets can be built without rare earths. And we basically have offshored our entire rare earth industry to the Chinese over the last 30 years. Now we've recognized that we're vulnerable and we need to develop rare earths. And Kulyk Lake is kind of a well-known in academic circles. You might be interested as a journalist to know that academic papers have been published on Kulyk Lake and the rare earths there. There's actually a genetic model that's been developed to explain why there's rare earths there. It's relatively famous in academic circles. And why would academics study it? Because it has extremely high grades and it attracts their curiosity. Why is there such high grade rare earths at Kulyk Lake? But the The thing from an economic point of view, and as stock investors are interested, has it been drilled? It has not been drilled. There's not a
Right.
single drill hole in the history of Kulyk Lake. There's a bunch of trenches. There's a lot of surface work done. There's tremendous potential, but what it needs is drilling. However, right now we're looking at the rare earths market. We're monitoring other rare earth stocks. We're looking at the price of neodymium and praseodymium, the two most important rare earth metals, and the price action has not been significant. So I called it, we're waiting for the OPEC moment. We believe the Chinese will need more rare earths than they're producing for their own use. You know, China got into the rare earths market 30 years ago because they looked nationally and said, what do we have in terms of resources? We don't have a lot of oil. We don't have a lot of natural resources, but one of the things we do have is a big rare earth deposit in Inner Mongolia. So let's go with that. And they developed the rare earths and they undercut North American production and basically put North American mines out of business. But China's demand for rare earths has grown dramatically. So they've built an entire industry, and they did at one point interrupt the supply of rare earths, and the prices went up 500%. You can look it up in the history. It was around 2010, 2011. And this is actually when the last time Kulyk Lake was actively explored. People saw the price action on rare earths, and some people went in and did some surface work. The price came back down as China was, I think there was a complaint made to the World Trade Organization saying that they were unfairly restricting the supply of rare earths, and they opened the market again. So the market is currently open and we can get rare earths from China, but we're tremendously vulnerable to anything they will do. And I've been studying the electric vehicle disruption, and China is actually ahead of us, and their demand for electric vehicles is growing faster than ours. And China's turned from being a net exporter of rare earths to an importer of raw rare earths minerals from other countries such as Myanmar, and exporting just an upgraded product of permanent magnets. So they need the supply of rare earths that they produce domestically, and they need even more. So we think that there's a potential for them to simply say, we need this supply, and the price will go crazy. When that happens, Kulyk Lake will come back into focus. But right now, it's not generating a lot of traction, and people don't understand the vulnerability we have in rare earths. But on the other hand, if we look at the price of uranium, uranium was $17 a pound 3 years ago. Now it's $62 or $65 a pound, and most pundits say that the uranium price is going higher. We're into a new contracting cycle.
So you're really weather veining the sector, basically. You're putting your energies where you know that they're going to get the most attention. But if you need to, if tomorrow suddenly rare earths became a hot commodity again, you've got a beauty property there that I'm guessing you don't need to do a lot of work on to keep a hold of.
That's correct. So we've basically been building our ownership term by doing further exploration. In fact, we just had another survey done at Kulyk Lake, just finishing this week. So we have a portfolio of properties. I've mentioned uranium. We've discussed rare earths. We also have copper in another property. This is what attracted me to Searchlight. It has several properties that are company makers, and we've been building this portfolio, and we have the flexibility that if we have the market become much hotter for copper, we can pivot to that. If it's much hotter for uranium, we can pivot to that. And most of our properties are multi-element, so we're not just dependent. Even at Kulyk Lake, it's uranium plus rare earths together.
Right.
At Doddridge Lake, it's uranium plus copper, cobalt, and vanadium. That's our strength, is we have diversity of critical metals in our portfolio.
And the whole damn thing is only a $3.9 million market cap.
Yeah.
So if any one of those things picks up, you'd have to think that market cap would be, this would be the levels that you wouldn't see again. Right.
But a lot of times a company's market cap in the speculative space is based on the financing structure of the company.
Yeah.
And Searchlight was in a tough shape and did a fairly low cost financing back in the depths of the COVID crisis. We financed at 3 cents. So in the bear market that we're in right now, I think we've come back to this price only because that was a financing price that we did 3 years ago.
Got it.
And that does not reflect the underlying value of the company. I think people need to see the drill truth machine get on our properties in order to generate interest.
Well, I like that you guys are doing exploration on multiple fronts, but you're also doing it without blowing through the budget and putting a gun to your head on results. The risk here seems relatively minimal. You don't have massive debt to worry about. You don't have to raise $3 million to go keep a property. You've got them in your hand. You've progressed them nicely, and whatever the market needs, it seems like you've got an option there on the table.
That's right. That's well said, Chris. We do have the flexibility because of the fact that most of our properties were acquired directly by staking, and then all you have to do is spend money on the ground in order to maintain title. And that's the Duddridge Lake property I just mentioned. We actually did option it from a prospector, but we made all of the payments necessary to get 100% interest. And the prospector retains a 1% interest in some of the claims on Duddridge Lake. But we've expanded the property quite significantly. But again, no cash payments in that case.
And no massive amounts of dilutionary stock being handed out everywhere.
No.
Do you have, I'm sure you've got your feelers out for other things out there as well. It's a time in the markets when some of the companies that aren't so de-risked are getting a bit panicky. Is there any options there for you for picking up more?
Well, I'd like to tell you a little story about that.
Yeah.
If you look at Saskatchewan, we both know that uranium, there's been huge value created in the sector. You add the value of NextGen and fission energy together, you're looking at $3.5 billion in value that's been created in that space. Another significant space in Saskatchewan is VMS base metals, copper zinc deposits. There's a company called Foran Mining, and they are building a new base metals mine in Saskatchewan, and they have raised over $200 million. The symbol is FOM. Pierre Lassonde is on the board. This is a major play in Saskatchewan, and it's another strength of Saskatchewan. They have VMS deposits. Hudbay Minerals basically became a billion-dollar mining company on the back of its VMS deposits around Flin Flon, right on the border of Saskatchewan and Manitoba. So the government of Saskatchewan is aware of their potential, and they decided to encourage exploration in the field. So what they did was they did a jointly funded federal provincial survey. They spent, we're estimating, we don't know the exact number, about $2 million on a grassroots airborne survey, state of the art, to detect VMS deposits. And then they announced that to industry, that they were going to announce where this survey was done on a particular date, which was September 2 years ago. Well, the week before they announced where the survey was located, we speculated that it was an area called the Wapaweka Greenstone Belt. And we were right. So we have now 20 drill targets that was basically found by the federal and provincial government, which we have in our portfolio. And it's in the same geological belt as the Foran Mining. It's the Proterozoic greenstones in Saskatchewan.
Okay.
So that's another play we have in our back pocket. So in terms of properties, we're not really looking at doing deals with third parties because we're sitting on plenty. We have drill ready targets across 3 different commodities in 3 different locations. And there's more.
It's almost like you're a prospect generator there, but I think that the terminology doesn't really apply when you're just collecting things for yourself.
We are basically a hybrid company. We are willing to do deals with other people. We did a deal on one of our lithium properties this year with a company called Brunswick Exploration. And we certainly would be willing to do deals because we do recognize we're property rich and we need to focus in on some drilling programs now.
Mm-hmm. So for the casual investor, and unfortunately, I think the majority of the market is that these days, looking for things that will be shortly festooned with news, would you say that Searchlight is at a place where your work is ramping up, where news is likely to start being dropped on a fairly regular basis?
Yes, absolutely. We had a late start to our exploration program this year, basically for permitting reasons. And we have basically just become active at Kulyk Lake and Duddridge Lake and probably one other area before the end of the field season. And looking forward, what we aspire to do is drill in the winter of 2024, either at Kulyk Lake or Doddridge Lake.
Would that be financing dependent, or are you good to
Yes.
go?
Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll either have to do a deal that generates some cash. We have our programs funded and the company is in good working capital position, but we don't have the funds for a drilling program right now.
So if you could wave a magic wand and have 20 million bucks in pocket, you've got plenty of places where you could apply it. But as a small company, you'll go as you can.
Yes. And it may not be entirely dependent on the markets, which are rather depressed, because people up the food chain in the critical metal space are desperate for the commodities that we have in our portfolio. And when we were at the prospectors and developers in March of this year, I would say we had more strategic investors in terms of governments and other entities that are looking for sources of rare earths than we had investors, speculative investors, looking at this sector.
Interesting.
Yes.
We see a lot of movement, especially in the lithium space now, of companies that are end users, kind of getting in and doing speculative deals to make sure that they have supply down the road. Yeah. Is any extension of that in rare earths, uranium?
That's what we're seeing. And we think, I've been around the markets for 40 years, and I was an investment banker at Canaccord and Haywood. And this is my, meal ticket, is figuring out when to finance commodities and what commodities are of interest. And what I see right now is a disconnect between the valuations we have in the junior market and the absolute need for these commodities. So the market is not responding to the prices, except for lithium and uranium. So these other elements are really not generating the prices that investors need to get the speculative market going.
We see a little oil and gas action, but that seems very dependent on what the gas prices are on a given day of the week.
Yes.
Do you think that there's going to be a point, and this is very, not even macro, but like Mondo macro talk, but do you think there'll be a point where governments will step in and take up the role that the markets used to play on the prospecting front?
Yes, I do. I think the governments realize that the market isn't delivering the supply that's needed. And that's why there are government funds available. And even the Canadian government is doing its utmost. You've probably seen the deal where they've announced a multi-billion-dollar deal with Volkswagen to build battery metals battery manufacturing plant in Canada. They've upped the flow-through credit for investing in critical metals and announced a specific credit to entice investors to invest in the exploration for these commodities. And you'll see constant announcements from the government, both funding research for universities to get support going. As I mentioned, we've seen government-funded airborne surveys that we're taking advantage of. What we lack, I think, Chris, is what we've seen in past cycles, such as you may remember the Voisey's Bay discovery in Labrador back in the 1990s. We haven't had the world-class discovery that has made investors a few $1 billion and really kickstarted the whole cycle. But we do see, if you look at the most actives on the TSX Venture, we do see significant interest in uranium and lithium. And there are some very promising discoveries out there. And in my view, uranium's had basically a double bear market back to back. Basically, you remember in 2012 that China sort of reached its peak industrialization, and we had a bit of a across-the-board commodities correction. And then we had the Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan, where the Japanese shut down their entire nuclear industry. And that put a double bear market on the uranium space. So uranium is playing catch up. And also, I don't know if you've looked at the uranium market, but uranium comes in large part from Kazakhstan, which is now problematic. And a lot of refined, enriched uranium is coming from Russia. Again, not a favorable situation. So anyway, uranium looks good, lithium looks good, rare earths will have its day, and we're banking assessment credits on Kulyk Lake for that day because we have one of the best rare earth properties in the country. And the grades are as high as you can possibly get.
So basically anything but oil and gas on the resource space, if it starts to grow, Searchlight's likely got an interest in some aspect of it.
Yes.
That's a pretty good place to be, I think. You know, as much as everyone hates the bear market, and you know, hey, I was calling in some sells this morning, but you know, like you said, we ain't using any less resources going forward. We really do have a supply and demand glitch that's coming up, and you've got to think that at some point that's all going to undo. It's going to spring almost from out of nowhere into a place where the guys that have actually been doing the work during the bear market will be the best benefactors.
Right. And one of the things you can do from a technical point of view is look for that chart where you've had a fall and then the chart is leveled off and is flatlined for a long time. I'm not an expert technical analyst, but I've been around the market a long time. And that is a chart that I always like because it tells you that you're washed out. And I would just encourage you to look at Searchlight. That's exactly what our chart shows.
Yeah.
We're continuing to progress, but our chart's flatlined.
It's interesting when your bottom isn't zero and you've been at that level for 6 months, maybe wavering by 0.5% in either direction. Like something's got to give there. And I can't imagine your company's going to be worth less having progressed the properties than it is now, which, you know, again, takes away a lot of that risk. If you're at the bottom and doing the work and not in peril, that's a good place to be for an investor.
Right.
All right. Well, we're going to keep an eye on you, Alf, because I think that this is one of those stories that you might invest in it today and it might still be at the same price tomorrow. It might still be at the same price next week. But when it does move, there may be no coming back to this price.
Okay.
Thanks, man. That's Alf Stewart from Searchlight Resources. SCLT is the ticker symbol. I always like the guys that when I do an interview, I end up feeling like my IQ is increased by a point or two afterwards. Thanks very much for your time, Alf. We'll talk again.
Thanks, Chris.